Welcome to the Voices of Otolaryngology podcast series, where we spotlight diverse perspectives and insights within the field of otolaryngology. I'm your host, Rahul Shah. Let's jump into it. Welcome to the Voices of Otolaryngology. I'm always excited, but perhaps today I'm super excited to have one of my new friends, one of your key academy leaders, our board of directors member, Dr. AJ Tompkins. AJ, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.
I told AJ I'm a lot of fun, but he doesn't know. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. He's got a full day ahead of him in his office. AJ, where do you practice?
I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I am a partner at Ohio ENT Analogy. So
I had the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me out there to visit.
Yeah.
It's an awesome practice setting. Congratulations on what you and the founders have built. Can you describe your practice a little bit to our members? I think it's always really helpful for them to understand how you practice and maybe even some of your background, which is unique, AJ.
Yeah. So to my background, I'm from the Philadelphia area. I've kind of bounced around in all my training and education. I went to Duke undergrad, Loyola in Chicago for med school, Ohio State for residency, and I was in the Navy for 9 years and did that post grad from residency. And in 2019, I exited the Navy, came back to Columbus, Ohio, where I trained, and had met my wife, and added one to our family, and now we're in the depths of that with 3 young boys, and that's fun. But yeah, I was delighted to and lucky to join this group, which historically speaking was a single specialty group, just ENT. And I think increasingly we're just having to, recognize ourselves as we're a multi-specialty group. We have ENT and allergy. To my count, we've got about 21 ENTs right now, 8 allergists, soon to be 9, 2 oral pathologists, and actually a neuro-ophthalmologist. So, it's just interesting how things have come together, and every practice has a different story, and ours is born of some mergers and new additions where there were opportunities for synergy. So it's unique. It's interesting. I love practicing here.
Yeah, I think it makes you such a unique leader in the academy, but also to talk about workforce. First of all, thank you for your service, military medicine, 9 years. Where were you during that time? I've had the honor to train a lot of military otolaryngologists and work with them during residency, fellowship.
Yeah.
Amazing servant leaders. Where did you serve?
So my first stint was actually in 2005 in Bethesda, and that was a year between my graduation from medical school and the start of my residency at OSU. And that year was it was grueling. It was very tough, but it was probably the most purpose-filled one of all my time, because we were taking care of a lot of uh, veterans coming back from, not veterans, but active service members coming back from Iraq at the time. And it was, it's hard to have a greater sense of purpose than to take care of people like that who are wounded and to try to get them back home to their families. And, that when you reflect back on it after the grueling ordeal and you can have more wisdom to the experience, I think that was probably the best year, interestingly. And I, took some great friends out of that year that I still talk to daily. And then after residency, I did 8 years where I went to 3 different places. I was in Northern Virginia at Fort Belvoir, and then I went to Newport, Rhode Island, and then lastly at Jacksonville, Florida.
Well, thank you for that sacrifice and your family as well. It's not easy on them. We affectionately, loving you, jokingly call you AJ Workforce Tompkins. Whether you like it or not, that's your name. You have catapulted our field, and I think our members need to know this because you and your task force have done yeoman's work, and I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that, but catapulted us forward in the conversation nationally about workforce. But what's awesome, and it goes back, I think, to your ethos of servant leadership, you're helping otolaryngologists day in and day out with aggregate macro level data to help their practices. Is that kind of what gets you going? Talk a little bit about and maybe how it started, your group. Let's shout out your task force members. And what I'll do is I'll periodically interrupt you with some off-color humor. But please tell the story, AJ.
Yeah, I mean, to shout out um, to all the members who are involved now or involved in the last report. Rhonda Alexander, Tiffany Chen, Andrew Coughlin, Ben Ostrander, who's a resident. He'll be graduating soon, but we added him. It was a nice addition. Doug Ray, Cecilia Schmalbach, and David Yen. Obviously yourself being involved and having oversight, and then amongst the academy staff, Jackie Cole, Tia Namaggio, and Caroline Versaw. Everyone is very important and instrumental in bringing this to production annually, and this past year was no different. So it really is a team effort. And
I have no idea how you just memorize those 13 names. Clearly, they're key individuals that you talk to all the time. When did this work start, AJ? What year? In your mind, or when did you and Dr. Denaney start thinking about this? Because when you were
yeah,
thinking about it, it wasn't a gimme. It was a big lift, and you and Dr. Denaney really, with your task force, took it on. When was this, AJ?
so I think circa 2021 was when I I started kind of poking into this a bit more. I think other parties had interest in this who are in leadership positions. And I think everyone has a natural interest in knowing more about this and benchmarking their practices and understanding, um, what's going on out there. If this is kind of macro level stuff that has serious implications on the micro level. And I think the more you think about it and it hits you like that, it's serious. And I think it affects all of us. And so I think there was just this underlying interest already. And so while my interest in it was maybe a bit more robust at the time, I don't think it was unique. And so I think that just some emails and inquiry ended up resulting in the task force being started again.
Yeah, that might have been a carryover from the military. So you see here in the civilian world, AJ, when you raise your hand, we choose you. Just kidding. So you asked a question and we said, AJ, take it on. So you and Dr. Denaney in 2021, talk a little bit about the methodology, then we'll get into the findings. This is absolutely robust. You stand by every data point. Can you talk about the methodology with your task force and how it's really a group effort starting in 2021 and then what you repeated this past summer?
Yeah, it's been similar. So there's, we're gonna do this, and the first two were just kind of let's just go at it, let's do it again, and the same process happened with those as the last one, where we had some meetings, brainstorming sessions. The last one was a lot easier because we could basically do this over, just sending out like a shared Google sheet. And because we had already asked a lot of these questions and it was more specific to call and compensation, and so it was a lot easier for people to just comment on and come to production because it was a much more narrow scope. With the two previous ones, we would have brainstorming sessions. We'd share again something on like a Google sheet of the questions, and we'd edit that. And I think the methodology and all this stuff is the most important thing about how the questions you're asking, the specificity, um, just the language you use. It's really important, and we've discovered some successes and failures in that regard. So yeah, and it's important. I think that it would be interesting to see to try to validate some of this. I don't know if that's within our scope this year or not, but it would be interesting to see if we could validate this, because it's really a membership driven thing, and people who respond and getting their responses and making sure these things are accurate, or rather, making sure that the data is managed in a very diligent way to ensure that what you're seeing is reflective of the reality of the responses. So we take we're very careful to attend to all that and keep things private. Uh, but yeah, that's the general process, and we come up with a list of questions. We work with a survey company, or we put it. This last one was a lot easier to put it out ourselves in SurveyMonkey, and yeah, and then slice and dice it. And as I said, the members previously, especially the Academy, were the ones who kind of took it to its publication standard that looks so nice, especially in the last two.
And so where can we find him? And I shouldn't have waited 15 minutes into the vodcast. I should have set it up front, and we'll make sure we link to it. So this is, I mean, you really published this. Where did you put it out there, and how can members access it?
Well, and yeah, so it's on the Academy website. It's under the Business of Medicine tab, and you'll see otolaryngology workforce. And on that, you'll see our three reports from 2022, 2023, and this recent one, the 2025 report.
Yeah, and talk to me about that. Has there been uptake? Have people been looking for it? I'm going to try something we've never done before. I'm going to try to find it while you're talking. I might share the screen. So go ahead and talk a little bit
Sure.
about uptake and the three reports, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that we've had the first two the response rates were pretty good. The last one was the most robust, maybe because it was the most brief, and maybe because our reach was a bit larger with the emails we sent out, but it was still the best in terms of robustness. And uh, in terms of uptake and interest, I mean, I think the more you do this and have it be a thing, and the more you talk to people, the more you realize that people are aware and they're using it. And that's been the most rewarding part is learning that people have used it and it's helped them
And
personally.
I don't know about you, AJ. Well, I know about you. You probably have it memorized, but I often go back and I look at the trends, and I know you've asked different questions at different points. Let me really get to the exciting part. Give us some nuggets. I'm an otolaryngologist driving to my office. I'm at the surgery center. I'm between cases. I'm home on a Sunday morning listening to this vodcast. Give me some pearls. How about from any of them? Give me some real facts, AJ, that I might want to start thinking about as a otolaryngologist.
Well, it depends on what you're asking and what you're interested in. I think that some of the demographic trends are interesting. That'd be the first thing I'd highlight, and that's why we highlighted it. We had the data and we asked about it, so I thought it was important to highlight. And we've seen trends for sure where practice patterns have shifted a little bit. And I think if you're going to identify two pieces of the pie that have shifted the most in terms of percentages, it's probably been the private practice, single specialty group, and to a lesser extent, solo practice waning a little bit, and then non-academic hospital employment increasing. Some of that's driven by not so much graduates going, it is graduates going in and choosing those different places or not, and the different proportions chosen of graduates, but also the people who might shift, inside their career. And we looked at that in the 2023 report. We did a, Sankey diagram. You can see all the different ways that people shift or have shifted in their career. About 30% of people will change their practice environment in their career, and we showed where that ebb and flow was. So some of that's representative of some shifts, even amongst people who have been out and practicing for maybe years, and they decided to shift. But we do see a trend overall towards more employment in non-academic hospital environments. So that was, I don't know how major you'd call it, but it's been enough to shift if you look at the institutional versus private split, in the first few workforce reports, it was more that we were, more private. And granted, this is Academy membership, and you have to, is this totally representative of the total population of otolaryngologists? That's valid as a question. But even if just holding all else equal, if you looked at the practice trends, now we're more slightly more institutional rather than private. And that's been the first year we showed that. And that was consistent with the BOG was also involved in our last workforce report, and they showed something very similar.
While you were talking, I pulled up the 2023 workforce report just for our members to know how thorough the task force is. It's 113 pages. While you're talking, I made it to page 7 and I couldn't find the diagram. So let's not do that here, but I will continue to look through and ask our members to look through. So demographic practice setting, your practice setting trend, that was something that caught your eye. What other
Yeah.
things do you call to our members' attentions?
Yeah. So I think that the, um, one thing I'd say, and if you go to if it's on page 54 is where that diagram is amongst practice shifts. So
Touche. I stopped at 53. All right, you keep talking. I'll try to pull it up.
um, yeah, so I think that um, it's important also to care about and know, hey, is there a, and you kind of expect this, but this is the first year based on the numbers that we had in terms of responses, being able to show geographic differences. And there's some slight differences across most of the practice regions. And we have a map showing exactly what those were. We didn't break it down. We broke it down by economic regions. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis, they break things geographically down by economic regions in the United States. And so we did it based on that, which allowed us to
Take a
look
little
at.
commercial. Do you see this, AJ? Is this the one that I didn't? You got it,
Yep,
AJ?
that's the one.
Do you want to? This is awesome, awesome. Do you mind just setting it up and try to describe it also because some people might be driving? But it's page 54, the 2023 Workforce Survey report from the task force, figure 5.3. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you look at the left hand, or the left hand column is where these are people who did change their practice environment. Like they may have gone, no, these are not the people who went from like one academic institution to another. This is someone who went from, say, academics to private practice or vice versa, et cetera, et cetera. So on the left, you see where people came from who did shift and change, and then you see where they went to. And it was, it's just interesting to see how the workforce, our workforce is not static. There's some dynamism to it, and people are willing to change. This didn't look at geography, but it just looked at practice environments. But it shows that there are other options. People are inside their career. About almost a third of us are changing their career trajectory in terms of the practice environment. So that's interesting. And it's important to think about on a macro level, like what that does in terms of uh, potentially for access and patient costs and things like that, or what's driving that. What are the underlying macro factors otherwise that are driving these things? I think are important to consider. Uh, so it just unpacks a lot and it brings a lot of questions when you start thinking about these things. So that's the first thing that I would think
Yeah,
about.
thank you for that. Yeah, awesome, awesome diagram. What kind of other big epiphanies? And you've called me sometimes where you've looked at the data and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. How about 2025 or 2023? So the practice trends was just something that caught your
Yeah.
eye. What else when you talk to people
Yeah, I
nationally
think
and within other specialties?
I think that some of the compensation data is not surprising. When you look at where people are typically in their peak compensation years, 50s are typically when we see that. I think that's when someone has they're very polished, they're efficient, they have a well-built practice, they're established in the community. That's not a surprise. And what I guess is a bit more surprising, we did see, and this has been consistent, we saw some differences amongst males and females. I think that's a big takeaway. Um, and
Yeah, I think you and I talked about that. I want to implore our researchers and our policy folks to look at that.
yeah,
AJ and I picked up that signal with your task force. I don't want to go into it here because we don't have an answer. You're painting us a picture, and that picture still showing us gender disparity in salary and income, AJ.
yeah, I would highlight something briefly to think about, in that if you look at how things have changed. I mean, this is kind of front and center. Everyone's aware of this, but despite that, the differences even it grew between our initial report and this, and that was based on 2021 income to 2024 income. And you have to. It unpacks a lot of questions. Are people? Is the recall? Are people? Is that accurate? Or people? And that's where the validation question comes into play. But even if it's thought to be as roughly accurate, and you look at the differences, I mean, if you think about it in a hospital or non-academic hospital or academic hospital uh, based employment situation, and you just look at it from an RVU perspective, and you do some just back of the napkin math. I mean, there's significant RVU differences. And so the question then becomes, what's driving that? Like, what is going on there? So I agree. I think that this is ripe for analysis. First of all, I would certainly be an advocate for transparency, and anyone in anyone's job environment. I think that's the first thing that would be most helpful. But then looking at like what's driving that RVU difference, like what's going on there, that productivity
Yeah.
difference. So
Wonderfully summarized. Thank you. It's really bothered us, you and I and the others, when we saw that, and it's bearing true, right? Like you said, no matter how we slice it. So I appreciate that. 2025. Now thank you. You took our ask to continue the survey, and you're going to do these in periodic fashions. 2025, you had a bit of a different focus. You would like to talk about that and some findings in 2025 that, hey, this is interesting.
yeah, so 2025, I've alluded to a couple of things already, but highlighting a few other things that we were able to unpack a bit more this time. So we focused more specifically on call and compensation. That was the more narrow focus, and we combined that with the call survey that the BOG did, and so that's the product that you'll see in the 2025 report. Um, we um, we we just wanted to throw ancillary income analysis there, and we could have been more specific about that, and will be in the future. But I don't think that's like the big takeaway. I think that what was interesting and what we really dove into a bit further was um, the call compensation. So we did see increasing trends. If you go back and look at our first report compared to this one, across all the different major practice settings, you saw increases in otolaryngologists who are paid for call. And so I think that's a positive development. It certainly is consistent with what the academy supports. And, this is certainly very labor intensive. It's time away from our families. And so it's interesting also to see that trend that I think is a positive development. And then also, looking at some of the data about are people compensated more if they have to go in more and that sort of thing. That was interesting to look at. And then how much people are compensated. Now, if that was that was the interesting part, was that we just left it very open-ended, which creates a lot more work on the back end for us. But we just asked in a very open-ended fashion, like, what can you give any description and breakdown of how you're compensated, what's the totals. And when people disclose that, we were able to really dive into that and try to describe that across 3 different practice settings. So we lumped all private, and we did non-academic hospital and academics. And then we tried to describe it a bit more detail in the areas below the graph, where we showed the different compensation levels for, we tried to put it out in a daily call compensation rate. And there were some similarities, some differences. And I think some of those are driving the differences between the amount of call compensation. I think some of those differences are driven by, leverage and to some degree historical practices. But and I think the BOG section touched on some of those factors a bit more. But it also, by leaving it open-ended, there's some upsides, in that it gives us a lot to consider. When people started describing their situation, it makes you think, oh, we wouldn't have considered that, or if we were to ask this again, now we have things to put in check boxes where we didn't think about certain things before. So we have to think about trauma, we have to think about general ENT call, splitting that, and so we really have to think about things in a bit of a different way based on people's responses. And that's the benefit of this open-ended response. And we did the same thing for locums, which was, we had no information on this. There's plenty of ENTs who are either interested in or doing locums, and this was never really described before, and there's such lack of information in this regard. So it was nice to leave that open-ended and get some responses there, put something out there to give people to chew on.
Yeah, very well said. And I think we've given them a bunch to chew on with the survey during this recording. I'm going to get into some more macro level questions. I think Dr. Tompkins and I implore our members, probably one of the best uses of 30 minutes of your time, to just look at it. It either resonates with you or it doesn't. And if it does, spend a couple hours going deep. And I'm going to ask AJ a question on how you envision an otolaryngologist using this. Before I do this, I want people to know that our council has looked at this, because when you do a workforce survey, you have to be careful for collusion or antitrust. And that's why AJ takes a lot of time publishing it at the macro level. That's enough said about that. Dr. Tompkins is also I, I don't know if he'll hate this, but he's around, available 24/7. I mean, he talks to people about this. He talks to other groups, Head and Neck Society, SPAO, SUO, ASPO. And so we really appreciate that. AJ, before we get into how a member should use this, I didn't know you're from Philly. So does that make you an Eagles fan?
Yeah.
Like true and true. All right, I'm a Commanders, true and true. So game on next year. I got you. You guys are done. So I got you. This is our time is coming, AJ. But so let me ask you, do you think the Eagles could beat the Buckeyes, or what would happen? Ohio State versus Eagles, if they played in a dream match, what would happen?
Oh, I don't think that'd be a contest.
The Buckeyes, right?
People always, in the peak Alabama years, some people pondered whether or not like Alabama could
Yeah.
beat the 0-16 Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
There was always that banter. No way. I mean,
All right, man. You're Eagles all the way. All right. So, Dr. Tompkins, how do you and the workforce survey task force envision members using this? How should I tangibly use it? So, yes, I'll learn. Yes, I will learn. But you talk about transparency. Do I take it to my hospital? Do I take it to my academic chair? How do you envision this? What are some use cases you've seen?
what's more rewarding to me is when people start thinking about things from a patient care perspective. And I think, in our next iteration, I think that we some of this is academic and needs to be derived from the classic publication in journals, and requires a bit more of a deep dive and something beyond our scope. But I think some of it, in terms of access, could be done by us, and that I think will be the most interesting part. And looking at it from a patient care perspective, like how do we, taking a step back, I think people can we don't know how people are going to use this information. I just have faith that people will use it in a positive way to better themselves and better their patients. And that's really what the hope is. And I can't possibly envision all the different ways that people can think about how they would do that. And I just think by being transparent, you allow for the market to kind of take care of those things, because individuals, we have a lot of very bright, good-hearted people. I have faith that they'll take the ball and run with it, but we just need to describe it for them and kind of generate that interest in part. And so that's the patient care aspect of it, is where I find that to be most rewarding, when people are thinking about ways to project care, take care to other communities, and describe things like that for people.
One thing that Dr. Tompkins mentioned that's very important. This is publicly available, but there is a disclaimer in there. I can't remember the disclaimer, AJ, but it's for our members use to reproduce, to use. It's not like we're giving it to the whole public, right? Help me with that nuance. It can't be used against you. I don't know how to articulate that properly, AJ.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I guess for the benefit of
Yeah.
I don't think a lot
The
of
specialty. That's right.
yeah, it's for the benefit of the specialty. And I don't think that and that includes us finding value and trying to produce value for our patients. Um, but it's really for us primarily. It's not for everyone and their brother. I think that the people who are going to find the most value, and it's ideally is for us, because we have to be the leaders in our space. We have to be the ones to think about these things and
The
generate.
problem, I was on the administrative healthcare side of an academic medical center. The problem is we are given outside surveys, outside analyses done by companies that might have ulterior motives, whether they're good or bad. The richness of this, Dr. Tompkins, is it's our own people. And do you want to talk about, if you can rattle off maybe even broad numbers, survey responses, and how diligent you are? You literally single-handedly with your group go line by line to make sure surveys are completed. There's no duplicitous. They're valid, right? So what are the survey responses? And this is our folks providing information to our folks. That's what makes it very rich. And the use cases that you described, I've seen all three of those. Going to your academic center, going to your local hospital, and just showing this is how the pay for call works, because those
Yeah.
administrators might not even know, AJ, about different models.
Yeah, that's important to think about. Is I'll touch on the compensation part. We touched on this in the webinar, is that when you start looking at the other products out there, either online, and I won't highlight names, but then there's the big players you typically hear about. Oh, our hospital uses X or Y, and that's what we're kind of held to. Well, if you look at the numbers when you do see what those results are, if you go do some internet searches or otherwise you have access to it, that's another problem is you don't have access to that. So as a physician, how do you vet that? How do you look at that? It's very expensive. And you're kind of it's all kind of shrouded in secrecy and how accurate is it, and you might have one of those robust surveys and it's only in the teens, like the number of say pediatric otolaryngologists that were actually surveyed. So how valid is that? And so we had 1583, so 1583 actively practicing otolaryngologists who responded to our survey. And that allowed us to slice and dice things with more nuance. So it's not accurate to say, like, for example, one of the larger survey companies that hospitals use, is it right to think about things when you look at those data? Is it right to think about that as like, okay, is that academics? Is that non-academic hospital? Is that valid for private? And then you look at the numbers, and then when you look at the numbers that we've produced in each one of those spaces, and in practice settings, it's much more robust, and it's current, it's transparent, and it's more nuanced.
Yeah.
So we try to slice and dice it by region, practice setting, even age, and showing those things. So I think we try to be more robust and transparent so that people there's no that secrecy anymore. People just know, uh, and have more immediate knowledge as to what's really happening.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know, and we can find it, and we'll link to the webinar. Why don't we do that, AJ? Our team internally will link to the webinar in the description here. So listeners, if they want to go a little bit deeper, they can access that webinar.
Sure, yeah.
Perfect. 3 more questions, and I know you have a whole office in front of you. I know how busy your days are. So I always know you as AJ. What do those initials mean? Can you tell us, or you'd rather not?
Andrew Jarrett.
All right. So are your kiddos named like different alphanumericals? So do
No,
you have like
no.
CJ, EJ, or do you have AK, AM?
Interestingly, we've kept their full names. We're not giving them any abbreviations or you know, Bradley is not Brad, and
Yeah, yeah, I got you.
a bunch of them.
Yep,
So
keeping that way. You have partnered, given a thought leadership to ASPO, head and neck. You're working with our APP groups, talking to our academic groups. You also represented us nationally. Pick any of those. Why do you do it? We're so appreciative because what's happening with your thought leadership, we're getting homogenous, standardized approaches. Could you talk a little bit about that? All these groups are awesome, but it really helps when we all work together as one otolaryngology head neck surgery. Dr. Tompkins, some thought on that, and then gratitude
yeah,
for taking time with the sister societies and nationally. You represented the Academy nationally.
yeah. Thanks for asking about this. Very timely, actually, because this week alone, I've talked to two different individuals. One just who was pursuing a research interest and just spitballing ideas, and through our conversation, we came up with like a much more narrow and good way and of like looking at something and in data that was already available, and a lot of the work was already done, and that ASPO has, and so that'll be very interesting to look at for that individual. Last night I was speaking to the president of the PA Society, and there's some ideas that we came up with there. So that's been very rewarding. And I think that it's important because, we can get survey fatigue and everyone has their own idea of what they want to look at, whether it's the AOA or the AAO-HNS, ASPO, and everyone, and those things are valid. And I think you're going to get a better response rate amongst those smaller, tighter knit communities sometimes. But I think there also has to be that recognition of a larger umbrella organization and what we can bring to the table and by working together. And I think that we have a lot of infrastructure and leadership that we've already developed here. And to bring those other parties to the table with us, I think would be is nice, and it's it's been rewarding to work with them.
Agree. The last thing we want to do is splinter. It's already complicated. We only have 15,000 members. You had a robust response rate of around 1,400. So appreciate that, AJ. Final question, and I know you've got to get to your patients. 2021, 2023, 2025, what's next and when?
Yeah. So I
No
think
one's going to hold you to it, AJ. This is just going to be publicly available, always recorded.
yeah. The ideal was to do, we wanted this past year, the 2025 one, we wanted to put something out a bit more quickly with a quicker update, an important update regarding call and compensation. Those things we thought, because there's more, they're very dynamic, things change every year. And as we saw, things changed a lot in the last, even since our first survey. So that was probably the most dynamic thing that we wanted to make sure, okay, let's just give a quick update on this. But in terms of next steps and a larger survey, aiming for this year. And as I said, I've been talking to lots of different people who are interested in this space, and people have lots of good ideas. We need to just kind of meet, brainstorm, narrow those things down, and then come up with a product that will be more similar to what we saw in 2023 and 2022.
AJ, you should consider politics. You didn't give me anything definitive there. I hear you. We really appreciate it.
Oh, if you want specifics, I can get into that.
No, no. But the point is, you and your group are seeing value in a periodic output, whether it's 24 months, whether it's 2.5 years, correct? I mean, this isn't one and done. This is an evolution.
Yeah, the workforce is dynamic. Things change. As we highlighted already, you're seeing compensation changes, you're seeing demographic changes, practice setting changes. That's the beauty of this, is that it requires, it's a moving target. It requires careful, regular attention. And that's why leaving this to like a journal publication is probably not the best idea, because that's going to be a much more narrow focused issue. It's going to be true perhaps for a period of time and not for others. So you can't really assume that that's going to be true for long stretches. It just requires this periodic assessment that we're doing.
Yeah. I will end with saying, when I knew what you and Dr. Denani and your group had worked on, I was blown away. Then when I see the value add to our members, like you said, it's one of the most gratifying, important things we can do as a specialty. AJ, I'll give you the final word. Just thank you for you and your group for doing this diligent work. It helps us stand by it, knowing that the ethos and integrity from your task force is there. I'm going to beg all members, please just look at it for 30 minutes. And if it's not worth your time, move on. And I know Dr. Tompkins, as a board member and leader, is very approachable. You can reach out to myself and I can connect you with Dr. Tompkins. AJ, final words, sir.
I think you touched on it there. I'm available, as are the task force members. If you've got ideas and thoughts, questions, want to explore something further, I'm always happy to spend my time talking to you. And yeah, take a look at it. I think everyone will find something. That's why we didn't want to make it too narrow. We wanted to make it broad. I mean, it seems daunting. Oh, there's 118 pages or whatever. Like, some of that stuff you're not going to care about. And some people will care about like an entire section. Some people care about everything. And so we didn't want to determine what one party was going to, that again, it's about being, robust, not too crazy, but, robust, but then transparent, and let people determine what they have interest in.
That's what I love about that, AJ. I think one of your group's philosophies, if you ask the question and if there's enough responses, you're going to publish it. That's why it's 113 pages, and that's why it's 48 pages. You're going to do what's right. Dr. Tompkins, thank you very, very much. We're so appreciative of your service to the Academy. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
We hope today's episode sparked some fresh ideas. If it resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with friends. Have thoughts or suggestions? Use the feedback form in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow us on social media for highlights, behind-the-scenes content, and updates. Thanks for listening. See you next time.